On April 2nd of 1912, RMS Titanic left here, the port of Belfast, the place in which she was built, never to return. Of course, we all know what happened next. On April 15th of 1912 at 2:20 a.m, she sank, taking the lives of 1,500 people with her. In the months and years that followed, the finger of blame began to pivot from person to person, place to place. Therefore, it comes as no surprise that eventually people turned to her builders, Holland and Wolff, for answers. Was there a major flaw in Titanic's construction that contributed to her loss? This was just one of the many questions her builders now faced.
The main accusations the builders faced in the aftermath of Titanic's loss was that the ship was somehow a lot weaker than her builders initially intended, and this weakness somehow contributed to her downfall. But where did this suspicion come from? To understand that, we need to look at how the ship was constructed.
I've come to the old Holland and Wolff headquarters here in Belfast, and in this very room, this is where plans for the Titanic were drawn up. Essentially, she came to life on paper in this very room. So it's only fitting that we begin to look at Titanic's construction right here.
Around 3,000 men from the shipyard worked to construct Titanic. It took over 2 years to complete the ship, and once finished she weighed 46,000 tonnes and stretched a staggering 882 feet. The largest ship ever constructed and supposedly the safest. The latest developments of shipbuilding have been used to construct her. Of course, ships back then were constructed very differently to modern day vessels. Today, ships are welded together with pioneering accuracy down to the finest of millimetres, using state-of-the-art computer technology. Titanic was built mostly from the blood, sweat and tears of human endurance. For many years, the question of the Titanic's strength was never in doubt. Why would it be? She was built by one of the greatest shipbuilding firms of the time.
The Thompson dry dock here in Belfast was built at the same time as Titanic, and it was built specifically for the Olympic class liners. You see, there was no dry dock big enough in the world to accommodate Titanic's size as well as her sisters. So what did they do? They built one specifically for them. And right next to the dry dock is this. What exactly is it, I hear you ask? I'm going to tell you.
This is a full-to-scale recreation of Titanic's forward bow section. It was made for a recent TV documentary using the same materials and methods that the builders used at the time of Titanic's construction. The red-hot rivets would have been hammered into the plating here, pulling the plates together, thus forming Titanic's watertight seal. It sounds really simple, it's not, there's a lot more to it, but for the sake of this, I'm trying to keep it as basic as possible. No one wants to sit here for hours on end listening to the ins and outs of shipbuilding.
And it is these rivets that help spark the debate as to her strength. Was there a major flaw in these rivets that called into question Titanic's claim as one of the safest ships ever to take to the seas?
On February 1st of 1998, a report was published by the National Institute of Standards and Technology that stated, after examining several rivets recovered from the wreck of Titanic, that the sample rivets possessed a ductile to brittle transition temperature, thus meaning that the rivets would lose a certain degree of strength when exposed to sub-zero temperatures. It was also found that the rivets contained an elevated level of incorporated slag, and the orientation of the slag within the rivets may explain why they failed when Titanic struck the berg. To understand the role the rivets played, we must also look at the damage Titanic sustained from the collision. Although we know Titanic received damage on her starboard side, the nature of and the amount sustained has never been really fully understood. Titanic slammed into the seabed bow first and frustratingly buried any conclusive evidence of the damage. Although there have been numerous scans and examinations, there is no visible damage on the wreck site today that can 100% be affiliated with the Iceberg collision. For many years after her sinking, it was assumed that the Iceberg had completely ripped apart her hull, opening giant voids of damage along her side. But the nature and speed at which she sank indicated that the damage she sustained was less catastrophic, but enough to sink her. Opposed to several giant openings, the pressure of the iceberg running along the side of the vessel caused the metal plating to buckle, thus placing a large amount of pressure on the rivets. As the pressure became too much, rivets began to pop, thus increasing the pressure on the remaining rivets, which in turn eventually gave way, causing an unzipping-like effect along the seams of her plating. It was this effect, which is believed to have occurred along several areas of her forward hull, that led to her sinking. The type of steel used to construct Titanic was first used in merchant cruisers around 1890 and was of high quality with good elastic properties. This made it ideal for both conventional and hydraulic riveting, but it came at a large cost for both builder and owner. On previous vessels produced around 1890 using this type of steel had shown that after 20 years or so in service, the hull of the vessel appeared to be in remarkably good condition. The workers at the yard even described the metal as being of battleship quality. Titanic's builders used larger sized plates to reduce the amount of butts and overlaps, thus decreasing the amount of riveting required. They were generally 30 feet in length and 6 feet in width, with an average thickness of around 1 inch. The largest plates used on Titanic were 36 feet long and weighed 4.5 tons. The thickness of each plate varied depending on the location of the ship and thinned slightly towards the bow and the stern. White Star gave Harland & Wolff a high level of freedom when it came to building its vessels and had an exclusive contract with the shipyard. This was known as the cost plus arrangement. White Star covered the costs of all materials plus labour, adding an agreed percentage of profit on top of the final cost of production. This guaranteed the yard's construction costs would be met. Of course, the higher the costs of production, the higher the price for White Star.
So where did the rumours stem from that her builders used a more inferior material when it came to building these ships, when it is shown that they used a tried and tested method when it came to shipbuilding? Well, just like on any modern day construction project, her builders had a range of resources available to them, and with a wealth of options to choose from, a more affordable method was at their disposal.
Records indicate that the iron rivets used on Titanic were not made of the purest form. The quality of iron was graded, with 4 being the highest. This was known as best, meaning that it was the purest of quality and of course more expensive. Titanic's builders opted to use grade 3, or more commonly known as best, a grade lower than the finest and of course slightly cheaper. The true reason as to why this type of material was used remains debatable. A potential answer could be that the builders simply did not have the option to do so due to a lack of grade 4 material. Harland & Wolff spared little expense when it came to their ships. In fact, it was quite the opposite, and they often spent more to obtain a finer, finished product. And remember, because of their agreement with White Star, the costs hardly mattered, as they knew their expenses would be covered. Was grade 4 really needed? They were ocean liners, not battleships. Why use it if it wasn't required? The likelihood that Titanic or her sisters would encounter a scenario where their safety was catastrophically compromised was unlikely. Now, many modern-day dramatisations often depict White Star as this ruthless, cost-cutting, money-grabbing business putting profit over safety and making the decision to use a lower grade of material, when in reality, given the fact they gave her builders free rein with construction, it was likely Harland & Wolff who made the decision to use grade 3.
Okay, so I'll agree that the examination of Titanic's rivets from her wreck site do show a level of weakness, but nothing to a point that we can say that Titanic was catastrophically weak. And there are examples throughout history and today that demonstrates just how strong Titanic and her sisters actually were, and many of them can be found right here in Belfast. As previously said, the Thompson dry dock here was built around the same time as Titanic and used the same materials. This gate here is the original entrance to the dry dock. It would have been moved aside to allow Titanic to enter, closed again, the water drained, exposing Titanic's hull, allowing for any necessary work to be carried out on the ship. Now, if you take a look at the surface of the door here, it should look familiar. The rivets and the steel plating were made in the exact same way, using the exact same materials that would have made up Titanic's hull. And the fact that it has been here for over 100 years holding back the water is testament to just how strong the steel is. And yes, over the years it may have sprung a leak or two. So would you if you was over 100 years old. It has never failed completely. The gate was used up until quite recently to hold the water back, until this new walkway was constructed, allowing visitors like me to come and take a look at the door. But the fact that it still stands here is a prime example of the skill and the craftsmanship and the strength that went into creating the Titanic and the Olympic class liners and every other ship that was built by Harland and Wolff. There is, of course, a much closer connection to the Titanic that we can turn to as an example of her strength. As many people know, she was part of a fleet of 3 vessels, the Olympic that preceded her, Titanic and the Britannic, all built in very quick succession, one after the next, using the exact same materials. And it is here where we find the answer to just how strong Titanic actually was.
The Olympic was the first of the Olympic-class fleet and went on to have one of the most successful shipping careers in history. She transported celebrities, royalty and of course many a paying passenger. I've covered Olympics history in another episode, so check it out if you've got the time. But to quickly summarise here, her career involved several incidences which demonstrated the strength of herself and of course the Titanic. She survived a collision with a battleship cruiser in 1911, which tore several holes in her side. She sank an enemy U-boat during conflict in 1918 by ramming it, and in 1934 she survived a collision with another vessel in heavy fog. All of these incidences combined serve as an example as to the strength of Olympic's materials and the quality of the workmanship involved by Harland and Wolff. So that stands to reason that Titanic, which of course was built with similar specifications, would have been equally as strong, right? So how is it Titanic sustained enough damage during the collision with an iceberg to sink her? Well, it's quite simple really, and it has very little to do with weak rivets. Titanic came upon the iceberg at exactly the wrong time, in the worst possible conditions, and struck it the very worst possible way. It was a perfect storm of events. And remember, the iceberg was formed tens of thousands of years ago, if not more. It wasn't just normal ice like the type you scrape from your freezer. This thing was like solid rock, weighing an estimated 1.5 million tons. Sadly for Titanic, nature very often wins when it comes face to face with man's creation, regardless of strength.
So was Titanic weak? No, absolutely not. I'll agree that the weakness found in her rivets, recovered from the wreck site, did play a tiny part in her downfall, but nothing to a point where we can blame her builders for her loss. You have to remember that Harland and Wolff had built some of the best ships before Titanic, and they continued to long after the Titanic. You also have to remember that on the night of the sinking, she lasted a lot longer than her designer Thomas Andrews had estimated. Combine that with the strength of her sister ships, and Harland and Wolff's worldwide reputation as one of the best shipbuilders completely debunks any theory that Titanic was catastrophically weak. And that, my friends, is all I have to say on that one. So, from a very sunny Belfast today, as the sun goes down over those hills there, and as a plane takes off from City Airport and completely ruins my shot, thank you for watching, and I shall hopefully see you again soon for more Titanic related content. So until then, keep well and goodbye. Oh, what a day. What a day. I wonder if Domino's delivered to my hotel.